Here now, Jesus using one of the I am sayings, which is the same phrase in Old Testament Hebrew where God says to Moses, tell them, I am sent you. It's no accident that Jesus is using these phrases, I am the vine, I am the bread, I am the shepherd, I am the gate. Because what he's describing here is his oneness with God to humanity. So, and that is the case, it behooves us to listen to what he has to say. So he starts out very truly, I tell you. Anyone who does not enter the sheepfold by the gate, but climbs in by another way, is a thief and a bandit. The one who enters the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought them all out, all his own, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. They will not follow a stranger, but they will run from him because they do not know the voice of strangers. Jesus used this figure of speech with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. So again, Jesus said to them, very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who come before me are thieves and bandits, and the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters by me will be saved, and will come in and go out to find the pasture. The thief comes only to steal and to kill and destroy. I come that they may have life and have it abundantly. So, a part of my reality in life, and I think this actually may be a good thing, is I know very little to nothing about sheep or shepherding. But I do know something about horses. When I was a teenager, I had a horse. He was a glorious animal. I loved him so much. Sundance was his name because he was a buckskin. And he was a racing quarter, which meant he wasn't the real stocky barrel, but he was the kind that went around the track. So he had long, thin legs, and he was fast. I remember the first time I kicked him in the side to giddy up, he went out, almost went out underneath me, so it looked like a cartoon where I was coming out of the saddle and the horse was going that way. I loved this horse. I rode him almost every day. I fed him, I groomed him, cleaned his hooves, made sure he was safe, made sure he was healthy. On Saturday mornings, I usually would pack a lunch and a canteen, saddle him up at 8 a.m., and I would ride all day. And back in the day, that was where the Wekiva developments are now, in Rock Springs, in that area of Central Florida. And I would find a lake or a pond, and I would take the saddle out on a hot day, and we would ride right out in the middle of the lake and would cool ourselves down. I spent the whole day with this horse. And it got to a place where he knew me so well, and I knew him so well, I no longer had to use voice commands with him. All I had to do was squeeze my legs a little bit in the saddle or lean forward, and he would do exactly what I wanted him to do. He knew my voice, he knew my spirit, and he responded to it. He didn't respond that way to everybody. The pasture where we kept him was right next to my high school. And so oftentimes after school was out, I'd saddle him up, go riding, and there would be guys hanging around on the campus. And this one guy said, hey man, let me ride your horse. I said, he's a spirited animal. I don't know if it's a good idea. I know everything there is about horses. I've known horses my whole life. Okay, if you think you're okay, then sure. He got up on Sundance, he said, giddy up. Yeah, go. And Sundance just stood there. Turned his head and looked. Come on, go, go, go. Turned his head and looked. And did not move. No matter what that guy tried, Sundance didn't do a thing because he didn't know his voice and he knew he could get by with it. Right, Laura? Horses know these things. Another guy named Pete. Pete smoked a lot of weed. Pete was a very happy fellow. Most of the time you say, Pete, how you doing? I'm good, man. So anyway, Pete wanted to ride Sundance one day. I said, Pete, I don't know if that's a good idea. Oh, no, man, I can ride like anything. I could ride horses, man. I grew up on horses. Okay, Pete. So Pete got on the back of Sundance, and Sundance trotted, and no matter where Pete tried to turn Sundance's head, Sundance took him under every low branch there was. and Pete was just totally beaten by all the trees, and when Sundance had enough, he stopped and Pete got off. But he was still happy. Pete was still happy. But see, Sundance didn't know his voice, and Pete didn't know Sundance's voice. And so when I read this story in the Bible, even though I've never had anything to do with sheep, I do have an idea of what Jesus is talking about knowing another person or another entity or another creature so intimately that you don't even have to speak to each other sometimes. Those of you who have lived together and been married together for a long time, and you actually still love each other. How often can you be at a dinner party or at another gathering and just look across the room and just nod your head and know exactly what each other is thinking? Right? Am I right? You can only do this because you know each other's voice. You know each other's spirit. That's why you can do that. Whereas, if a man looked across the room and went like this to another woman, she might get a whole different, or maybe she got it right. I don't know. But it's a scandal regardless. So this is what I hear Jesus saying in this passage, and that his sheep know his voice. Now, many of us would look at this passage and think, well, the church is the sheep and Jesus is the shepherd. Well, sheep are not smart animals. They're pretty passive and pretty dumb. So in the first century, as today, to call someone or a group of people sheep would not be a compliment in any way. For me to say, you are my sheep and I am your shepherd, is really to insult you, because what I'm saying is you're dumb, you're passive, and without me, you can't do anything. And you all would not like that, would you? I would hope not. So what does it mean? Whenever we see, especially the Gospel of John is more about the metaphor, the allegory, the symbolism, than it is about the literalness. And even in this story, it says when Jesus told this that people still didn't have a clue what he was talking about, so he told it again. Sheep may not be smart animals, but they are instinctual. They know who will treat them well and nurture them, and who will protect them, and who will lead them, and who will take them to green pastures, who will take them to still waters. It's an instinct. Sundance could tell, even though horses are not very bright either, but Sundance, with his instincts, could tell that I was someone who would be safe for him to be with. He knew my voice, he knew my movements, so that we worked together. So what this is talking about more than anything else is that instinct within each and every one of us, that either is listening to the voices that are healthy voices or listening to the voices that would destroy us. And Jesus said that throughout your life there are going to be people who try to climb the fence and not go through the gate. And they are thieves and they are bandits. The word thief comes from the Greek word kleptes, where we get the word kleptomaniac, someone who has a problem with stealing. Kleptos describes someone who steals with craft and fraud. Have I got some land in the Everglades for you? It's like when my parents thought, and most people in Florida moved to the mountains of Carolina. My dad came home and said, all the property on the top of the mountain's cheap. You got great views up there, until they lived on top of the mountain and realized when it snowed and it got ice that they couldn't get down from the mountain. That's why the land was cheap. Theft by craft or fraud. A bandit, the word is lestes, which means to steal by force and by power or violence. So, here's the reality of living in this world. There are always people whose voices are trying to overcome you and steal your soul. Some people will do it through force and through power and through violence. Some people will do it in acts of violence. Sometimes when we're young, we are traumatized by the events and acts of other people, and it traumatizes us. In fact, sometimes it will traumatize us so much that we trust no one's voice, not even our own. Other people try to steal our soul through craft and through fraud. And they'll use tools like guilt and manipulation and shame, you see. And if they can get you hooked in, then they can get you to do anything, even if it's not for your best interest. So what Jesus is saying is listen to your instincts. Listen to your instincts. You know deep within yourself who is telling you the truth and who is not. But you have to be connected to your inner self, your God self, to know that. But there's another way that the thief and the bandit try to steal your soul. And it doesn't come from somebody out there, but more often than not, it comes from within your own self. Because one who does not have the instincts and the concerns of the person at heart and want to nurture that and protect that will not go through the gate and the shepherd, but try to climb over the wall. In other words, bypass the entrance. We call this spiritual bypass. Let me share with you what I mean by that. Spiritual bypass is a person who looks at life so analytically that they can study the great philosophers, they can study the great religions, they can study the great mystics, they can know more about the Bible and about Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, they can know about Buddhism, they can know about the pagan religions, they can know everything there is to know intellectually about God, about spirit, about religion, about faith. But they've never gone through their heart. They don't know it experientially. So you guys are now Greek scholars. The word is to know experientially. Brilliant sheep you are. You see, I know God. Not because I've studied the Old Testament in Hebrew, and I've studied the New Testament in Greek, and I've studied the early church fathers, and I've studied, different kinds of parts of the Bible and different tools and exegesis and church history, and so all that stuff helps me in knowing God. I know God because of my life and the things that have happened in it, that when I finally opened the gate, that part of me, which is my God self, was allowed to connect here in my brain as well. When early on in my career, I preached mostly about what I hoped was true about God. I was not being irresponsible, but I personally had not experienced the grace, the love, the comfort, and the nurture of being one with the Spirit of God. I had not experienced it yet. I only could proclaim what I knew. You see, I had bypassed my heart because of the wounds in my own heart that I preached from my head. But there were events in my life that drove me to look deep within myself, and I experienced that Spirit. You can't ask me to prove it. I can't prove it to you. How can you prove your mother's love? Can you prove your mother's love, or is it something that you what? Experience. Therefore, gnosko. You know it because you've experienced it. Spiritual bypass would have been for me to continue to proclaim the Word of God without ever having gone through my own heart and my own soul to experience it first. And that is being a thief. That is being a liar. Jesus says, I am the shepherd. I am the gate. And you must come through me to have salvation. Let's take a look at that for a moment. I am the shepherd. I am. Ego, I me. in Greek, I am. That's the words of God when God says, I am. Tell them, I am sent you. The reason why I can believe these words of Jesus, because I believe, beyond a shadow of a doubt, because I've explored elsewhere, that Jesus is the human being who walked upon this planet, who was one with the Spirit of God. He was fully conscious with his brain about this God self-spirit in his soul. That's why I follow Jesus. That's why Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are the text for my life. That's where I find my inspiration, from those stories and those teachings and those actions of Jesus. And I have learned to know them through my own heart and my own soul. So yes, I know that that voice of Jesus is within me, and that voice continues to teach and to nurture and to challenge me. Jesus is the gate. What does that mean? Does that mean that you all must subscribe to my specific interpretation of Jesus in order to have salvation? Here's the reality, folks. If I were to do that, and I'm not, I would not be the first. Uh-oh. This usually is a warning. I've got a lot more to say. I wouldn't be the first. Here's the thing. There are so many expressions of Christianity, and each and every one of them claim that theirs is the way. Am I right? But do they all agree on the way? No. So if you don't subscribe to my brand, then you're going to go to hell. But wait a minute here. You are going to hell because your brand is different than my brand. Wait a minute here. You both are going to hell because we're the ones who know the truth. Oh my gosh. Is this what Jesus was saying when he says, I am the shepherd and the gate? One must come through me. Jesus was not offering some prescribed method in order to get to heaven or get to hell. Believe me, if you are living outside of that relationship, if you're living totally in your ego mind, if you're living totally in your analytical mind, if somehow that thing up here is not connected to your God self, your soul self here, you are living in hell and probably creating it for everyone else around you. Hell is not a destination after you die. It's where you live here and now. If you're not connected in your soul, in your mind, your consciousness, and your spirit. So Jesus is the gatekeeper. What does that mean to me? I'll share what it means to me, and then you decide on your own. Okay? What it means to me is that I can trust Jesus' teachings. I can trust his actions. I can trust that if I emulate them and incorporate them into my life, that I will experience that passage into the kingdom of God, which really dwells in my heart and my soul. It's not that I prescribe to a specific religion. It just means that I live with the essence and the Spirit of Christ and incorporate it as often as I can, every day, as much as I can, to live that Spirit and connect with it. That's what it means to me. And yet, over the centuries, people say, if you don't believe it this way, you're going to hell. If you don't accept it this way, sorry, I'm going to have to kill you because, well, I love God that much. Salvation. What is salvation? For many of us, it's the credits and the debits of our life, and hopefully when we breathe our last breath, we've done more good things than bad things, and God will let us in. Am I right? That's another misteaching over all these centuries. Salvation comes from the Greek word soteria, which means a new spirit. If you follow Jesus, if you listen to his voice, then you get a new spirit. When I finally open myself up to truly take the risk to experience the presence of God in my life, it opened up my spirit. It created within me a new person. My spirit was being transformed because of this. And therefore my salvation is not so much my eternal destiny, but how I live here and now and in what way. And my salvation is I can live in peace, I can live in confidence, I can live in love and mercy and patience most of the time. That is my salvation. My salvation is knowing who I am and fulfilling that. Now, some people think that whenever you give your life to Christ, or you allow Christ to be your salvation, your shepherd, your gate, that somehow you're going to have to live a dull and boring life. Let me share with you a true story. An Episcopal priest went to go buy a Harley Davidson because he has a whole lot more faith than I do. And while he was buying the motorcycle, the salesman was telling him about the wind in his hair and the power between his legs and the acceleration and how chicks really love riding on the back of that thing. And then the question came up what he did for a living, and he was an Episcopal priest, and it all switched around. It's a very practical machine. It gets great gas mileage, and you can see all around you. And he thought about it later thinking, is it because I'm a priest and I'm a Christian that people think that I want to ride on a lawnmower more than a Harley Davidson? Whenever we're living in oneness with our spirit, with God, it may call us to be or to do something that's totally different than where we are now because maybe we're living a lie. Or it may challenge us just to fulfill in a greater way where we are right now, because somehow we manage to fit in what God has planned for us. And for some people, it's different than for others. For some people, to follow that spirit and to hear that voice means they go to third world countries and have to deal with drug lords, dictators, and people who will kill them because of the message and what they're doing with the people who are there. For others, it's having books that inspire millions or who preach to thousands and tens of thousands. I know what it is for me. For me, it's the one-on-one. It's being at a place where we know everybody's name. That's my purpose, you see. And it took me a while to be able to be okay with that, but I love that now. And what's risky about it is that I spend a great deal of my time every week sitting with individuals who take the risk of opening their souls up to me and allow me to work with them and the Spirit of God to bring healing to those wounded souls so they might live their lives what? Fully. And help them to know that voice that is deep within them. A professor was meeting with his former students. And they had all had their master's degree, they were in their careers, and they all gathered back to speak with their professor and visit with them. And as they were sitting down with their professor, they were talking about how lucky they were to enter into their careers, that they were doing exactly what they had prepared for. And then they started talking about how disillusioned they were, and about the stress that they experience and they undergo, and about kind of sometimes how they're not really happy in their careers. They feel miserable. And so the professor thought this would be a good time to take a coffee break. So he left them all there, and he went to his kitchen, and he got a pot of coffee, and he brought out the cups, and they were all different kinds of cups. Plastic cups, plain cups, glass cups, porcelain cups, fancy schmancy cups, every kind of cup you could think of. And he set the coffee and the coffee tray down with all the cups, and all the students went and poured themselves a cup of coffee. And guess which cups they chose? The really nice ones. Not one of them picked a plain one, or a paper one, or a plastic one. And the professor pointed it out to them, saying, you know, look around. Each one of you chose the finest cups to drink your coffee out of. And then I noticed you were looking at each other to see who got what cup. And I want you to hear this. The reality is you wanted the coffee. And the cup you've chosen to drink your coffee out of did not change the taste of the coffee. But sometimes we can look at life in such a way that if life is the coffee and your jobs, your careers, your 401ks, your status, the things that you purchase are the cups, sometimes we get to focusing so much on the cups of life that we miss what we're really thirsting for in the first place and what gives us real joy and real nurture. Your jobs are the vessels, but that coffee, that thing in life, that is the core. That is the core. Focus on the core. Focus on what real life is. And that is kindness and compassion and mercy and tenderness and generosity. And then no matter what's around you, if you're focused on the life in you, you will see a great reduction in the stress and the competition that you have. So I don't know where you are today. Are you focused on the cup or are you focused on the coffee? Given it's 11:25, it might be the coffee right now and the cake. But this is what I do now. My horse, Sundance, responded to just a simple change in the way I've situated myself in the saddle because he knew my mind and he knew my spirit and he knew my voice. And I spent years nurturing the relationship with that horse, and hours. And amazingly, as I spend time nurturing my relationship with my soul and with God, that it's not so hard to hear the voice. It's not so hard to feel the nudge and the push. You see where I'm going? When you're intimate with the shepherd, and when you know that the gate is your heart, and you spend the time nurturing that and listening to that, then you don't have to spend your life wondering, what does God want with me? You will know because you hear the voice of the one who is guiding you, and you've developed the intimacy to experience that voice as it leads you. Because Jesus is the good shepherd. God is the gate. And this is what's most important in this life. Let us pray.